Hello friends, welcome to LevelUp IAS. Yesterday, 19 September 2023 will go down as a very important day in the history of India for various purposes. One of it being that we moved from the old parliament building to the new parliament building. And with that came introduction of a very revolutionary amendment to the constitution that we are going to discuss today. You would be knowing that we are going to discuss about the proposed reservation of women's into the elections of various legislature of the states, of the NCT Delhi, and even to the House of People in the parliament. We will try to delve into the topic and we will try to see what is the rationale behind this proposed reservation of women's into the parliament. We will also try to see what objective we wanted to serve. Why do we even require this kind of reservation? And the arguments against it, for it, what is the present status of the representation of women in the Parliament of India as compared to other countries across the globe. But basically, first let's see what is the motive, underlying motive behind it. Now, can't it be that women should be let to compete along with the male's counterpart, and as it should be let whatever the process is being already been there into the force in India? How far it is required to give representation to the women in the parliament, and why it is required to give representation to the women in the parliament? There is a very famous quote you will find in this board written by Melinda Gates. She says, "A woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman." So whenever we talk about the women empowerment, whenever we talk about the progress of the women, it has to be firstly ensured that these kinds of empowerment are led by the women themselves. The women who are having a say in any kind of political landscape, social landscape, and economic landscape, then only we can say that we are able to achieve somewhat of the women empowerment. I'll just simply try to explain with a kind of the infographics, or you'd say that why do we even require women reservation? Now here, besides me, you will find that this is an ad which is related to one of the shows led by a very famous comedian, and the show is called Chacha Hamare Vidhayak Hai. Now, why Chacha Hamare Vidhayak Hai? Have you ever heard someone saying Chachi Hamari Vidhayak Hai, या Mata Ji Hamari Vidhayak Hai, या Dadi Amma Hamari Vidhayak Hai? This may look very absurd, but this indicates towards a fact, and that fact is the gender stereotyping of a particular role. There are certain roles in the society, there are certain jobs in the society which has been divided and which has been stereotyped for a particular gender. There may be certain things which are conventionally considered by society to be performed by the males as compared to certain other roles which are specifically let only for the females. So this is the case in the politics. Politics has been considered to be the area which is dominated by the male and which should be performed only by the male. Public services has been monopolized by one of the sections of the society and excluding the half of the humanity aside, almost. So this is why at the very onset, I would like to say that this particular constitutional amendment bill, which was introduced in the Lok Sabha yesterday, is a kind of a revolutionary thing and one of the landmark event in so far the constitutional history of India is concerned. Now, if we are able to pass this bill, which in all probability is going to get passed, this will be one of such thing which even the constitution makers of India were not able to achieve. The matter of women reservation is not a very new thing. It was also debated during the Constituent Assembly, but finally it was left not to be included in the Constitution. Now, this is going to be a very revolutionary step, a very landmark step, but we will also see that this is not going to be the only thing that is needed to be done. There are several other aspects which also needed to be taken care of. So let's start and let's see what are the issues regarding it, what are the purpose, what are the objective, why do we require the reservation of women in the parliament or even the state legislative assembly, and what is the Constitution 128th amendment bill which has been introduced in the parliament. So this 128th amendment bill 2023 is now being introduced in the parliament, and it seeks to provide a constitutional guarantee to the representation, rather increased representation to the women in the parliament, state legislative assembly, and the legislative assembly of National Capital Territory of Delhi. Accordingly, it is going to make changes in certain articles of the constitution, that we will also see what are the constitutional articles which is sought to be amended by the 128th Amendment Act. We will also see when and how it is going to be implemented, what are the problems it might face after implementation, and what we even require to do after implementing this particular Constitution Amendment Act. But first things first, what is the objective of it? Why do we even require? Do we actually need these kinds of reservation? Or these kinds of reservation is simply a political gimmick? So this, let's analyze. Why the act itself, what it has to say about it. So the statement of objects and regions, which is presented along with this constitutional amendment bills, very beautifully tries to elaborate the regions and need behind these kinds of reservation mechanism for women. It says, now India is already into the Amrit Kal after crossing 75 years of its independence, and during this Amrit Kal, it is mainly motivated by the concept of contribution of all sections of society. So when I say all sections of society, when I talk about making our democracy more inclusive, then how can you forget about simply half of it? Women constitute just as nearly as half of the entire population on this earth. If you go by the simply, at least even 45, 48, 49% of the seats. So if I say 50% of the humanity are women, then 1 out of every 2 things should be done by the women. This is the simple logic of mathematics. So if half of it is women, so 1 out of every 2 seats in the parliament should be filled by women. 1 out of every 2 startups should be led by women. 1 out of 2 jobs should be given to the women. So if they are 50% of the population, then why we are still talking about a scenario when there are only 78 representatives of women in the Lok Sabha, and in Rajya Sabha it's only 24. So hardly we are able to reach to a 14% representation of women in our topmost legislature. Their status is even further lowers in the various state legislature. We'll also try to gauge and compare with the global average, but let's see the first, what is the objectives and region which is then put by the 128th Constitutional Amendment Act. Firstly, it says it tries to make all the sections of the society in its effort, in our endeavor to promote Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. So this is the kind of the mantra which is now being very pushed vehemently by the present government to make our whole system inclusive, and it is very pertinent that women are also the part of it, and a very considerable part of it. Next is go on to say that women is itself constituting the half of the population, and it is extremely important in the realization of this goal of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Vishwas. Women empowerment and women-led development. It also recognizes the role of women to the forefront in the women empowerment and in the women-led development. When I talk about the women empowerment of India, this is the irony that the journey of women empowerment in India has been mostly dominated by the narrative which are created by non-women. Simply some of the male leaders who had acted proactively, and they have tried to come out with certain versions by giving certain affirmative actions or giving certain freebies or distributing certain cylinders or distributing certain free gas connections. Of course, these are certain strategies which may try to bridge the trust deficit. This may also try to distribute certain welfare mechanism, but it is not the only thing. Remember, simply giving a freebies and simply giving certain affirmative action, you cannot aim for a larger picture of women empowerment. A true women empowerment happens only if that women empowerment is led by the women themselves. So this is a bill which will ensure that there are more women into the policy making. There are more women included into the legislative formulations of various policies. There are more women in the temple of our democracy. Democracy happens to be more inclusive now on the basis of even gender. It's not a new thing that we are going to give reservations in the legislature. We are already giving reservations to members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the legislative assemblies of the state and even in the parliament. Now it is an endeavor to extend this kind of legislation, reservations, to the women also. Further, let's see what the statement of objective has to say. The true women empowerment of women will require greater participation of women in the decision-making process. This is actually the statement of regions which has been there put in the proposed amendment itself. This amendment is recognizing that for what region we are bringing this amendment, for what region we are trying to bring the reservation of women into the parliament and the legislative assemblies. Participation of more women into the decision-making process. This is what is required, and this will actually lead to the women empowerment. I will just I'll just show you a brief clipping. I was going through the YouTube and I found a very really inspiring ad that truly portrays the picture how women's empowerment should be there, what role women could play in the society. So these are certain broader goals which is telling, which is urging that there is a greater need for these kinds of legislation. Apart from it, the women reservation in the parliament and the legislative assembly serves multiple other purposes. For example, it will lead to the socio-economic empowerment of the women. But before going for the socio-economic empowerment, the political empowerment is a prerequisite thing. Unless and until women have the voting choices. Now, India is one of such countries which has granted universal adult suffrage without any discrimination to the males and females in India. But even though we had granted equal right of voting way back in 1950, but throughout this 70 or 75 years, hardly the number of representation of the women has risen to 14% odd. Now, if we can guarantee the equal right of voting, then why can't we guarantee the equal right of participation of women? Now, it is left open. Already it was left open. Any women could contest. But simply giving a provision and creating an enabling environment are two different things. This particular bill will create such an enabling environment when certain women post certain seats to the extent of 33%, 1/3 will be reserved for the women, and it will ensure the greater participation of women into the legislative process. So this political empowerment will later manifest and produce socio-economic empowerment of the women. This is the first thing we want to achieve from this bill. Apart from this bill, women in parliament may also serve inspiration for generations to come. If women are actively portrayed as the role models, what they can be after they are more included into the legislative process, the people can observe them and people can get further motivated and they can break free from barriers of the society and participate in other socio-economic activities. So this guarantee of reservation is not only single facet. It has a multi-pronged benefit. We are counting them. Be it the socio-political empowerment or be it women serving as the role models. Not only that, we have other benefit which can do for that. Women for women. Now herein, by including more women, we are trying to advocate for women-centric approach in the policy making, in the legislative deliberations. They will bring in whole perspective from a different angle. This may make our legislative system more inclusive, more participatory, and more diverse in nature. Again, it will lead to breaking free from the vicious cycle when further lack of representation of the women was leading to further disempowerment of the women. It continued and it continued, and the gap between the women and men in the society has reached to such a level that we are able to face. Now I'll give you a simple fact why I am talking about this gap and why I am talking about this vicious cycle of disempowerment of the women. Previous year there was a survey of Indian startup which were conducted. I simply gave you mathematics in the beginning. If women constitute half of the population, going by this logic, every other thing should be led by women in India. But only meager 18% of the startups in India, which were unicorn, had women as their leaders on the role of MD or CEO. This is very meager, 18%. So 18 out of 100. Rather, it should be 45, 46, 47, 48, or even 50. So only 18%. Consider the kind of opportunity which women are having. despite the finance minister itself being the women. Now, what is the problem here is such kind of finance minister or women legislators are very few which can be counted on your fingers. They are exception. Now we are talking about bringing it as a norm. So at least 1/3 of the legislator are women. There are other multiple benefits also. For example, it will have a recording effect. Recording effect, what I mean to indicate is that when women are holding the constitutional post, the whole machinery will start to take them seriously. Now, if a person or if police is investigating certain things or there are certain issues, so public representative can have a certain deliberation with the police officials. Police officials will start to take the crime against women more seriously. Now they are taking their legislative mandate for that. But with the inclusion of more and women into the constitutional machinery, into the constitutional post, there may be situations when these things are taken pursued in a more serious way, because there will be pressures coming out from these legislators to the instrumentalities of the state. These are the multiple benefits what I wanted to indicate. But most and most important, why I am calling it to be a very revolutionary thing, because this will provide the real version of women empowerment. When women themselves are leading the journey of their empowerment, it's not a certain pseudo kind of the empowerment which is imposed or which is articulated by males themselves. It will be the women who will be leading the journey of this empowerment. Just simply, let's see a particular thing in this particular ad. This ad is a commercial ad by particular company. You'll find that on YouTube also. So after giving due credit, this particular ad is a very beautiful message. Let's see for this for a moment. This will portray the different versions of the women and their empowerment and how they can contribute. You'll find the different shades of women's present here, and it is upon you to choose which kind of women is required for the journey of this women empowerment in India. Let's see for a moment, for a 2-3 minutes, this particular video.
मैम मैं उठा के देती हूँ, ये लीजिए। मैम बच्चे के तलवे पर ना मालिश कर देना, चुप हो जाएगा। मेरे बच्चे भी रोते ना तो मैं ऐसे ही करती हूँ, चुप हो जाता है।
अच्छा, कितने बच्चे हैं आपके? 3। तो ड्यूटी के साथ साथ कैसे मैनेज किया?
मैनेज का क्या है, 10 घंटा यहाँ पे ड्यूटी खत्म करने के बाद बाकी माँ होने का ड्यूटी। मैम
ये डबल ड्यूटी करते करते जो लाइफ में पीछे रह गई हो, उसका क्या?
आपके हिसाब से आगे रहना किसको बोलते हैं मालूम नहीं, पर मेरे बच्चों के हिसाब से ना मैं हमेशा ही आगे हूँ।
So sweet।
अच्छा तुम बताओ, तुम तो पढ़ी लिखी लगती हो और यहाँ तुम्हें कोई जज करने वाला भी नहीं है। सच बताना, जब से बच्चा तुम्हारी गोद में आया है, तुम माँ बनी हो, तुम्हें नहीं लगता तुम्हारी फ्रीडम, तुम्हारे अपने सपने, इंडिविजुअलिटी सब खत्म हो गई?
नहीं, इनफैक्ट जब से मेरी ज़िंदगी में आई है ना, मेरी फ्रीडम, मेरी इंडिविजुअलिटी, मेरी पहचान को जैसे एक और पहचान मिल गई है, माँ की।
आसान है तुम्हारे लिए ये सब फिल्मी बातें कहना। हाउसवाइफ हो ना, अगर एक बार भी लाइफ और वर्क बैलेंस करना पड़ जाए तो तुम्हें दुनियादारी समझ आ जाएगी।
आसान नहीं था इस नन्ही से शैतान के साथ साथ इस पूरे डिस्ट्रिक्ट के लॉ एंड ऑर्डर को संभालना। ये बस नजरिए की बात है। मैम, गाड़ी आ गई है। सीमा रस्तोगी, SSP झांसी।
मैम, आपका पार्सल। तू दरिया की वो धारा है जो दो राह भी तर जाए, है आईना तू ऐसा।
Now you will find that in this video, after watching this video, this particular commercial ad, this is a very beautiful ad, by the way. I like it very much personally. It has a very beautiful message. Women in different role. How can a woman manage both work and life? So you'll find there are four personalities, four characters here. An ambitious woman, a women empowerment led by an ambition, a women empowerment who may be successful but not too compassionate, a kind of the inspiration, and a kind of the real women empowerment when she is able to manage their work, their life, their children's, and still not boasting or complaining about it. Now you have to think, which version of women do we require in our country? It is this, or it is this. So women, once if they get opportunity and they get involvement into our policy making, they would have this effect when they are serving as a beacon, when they are serving as an inspiration to other women like this who are still succumbing to various kinds of social pressure. They might break free from various kinds of social, economic, and political barriers. This is the greater role, and this is the greater purpose, I would say the bigger purpose, larger picture. Now, do not consider reservation only as a constitutional tool. It is a kind of the social mechanism. It is a kind of the social intervention for a very broader picture, for creating a just, fair, and equitable society. And this is why I would say this was a long pending due on the part of our constitution. And this is why here the efforts of any political government who is there, consider maybe it anyone, and all those who have played a part in this, they must be appreciated for that. Keeping the political benefits, political credit, taking everything aside, this effort must be appreciated. I wanted to indicate about this particular women serving as an inspiration here. This is the actual women empowerment, what we can try and we can achieve from these kinds of proposed legislations once it becomes an act. So this act has a very broader purpose that we have already seen. So now we are settled that why do we require these kinds of legislation? Now let's see that we are talking about women-led development. So where do women stand presently? It is very important to note that after 75 years of Indian independence, how much representation women has got in the parliament. Let's see through the numbers. It says that when the first Lok Sabha was elected in 1952, women constituted only around 4.4%. And even before you talk about the Constituent Assembly, that has a meager 11 to 12 women members in the Constituent Assembly, around 3% of total. That number has, however, risen. But risen up to what? 14%? It's 12% of the total, 14% in the Lok Sabha only. The Lok Sabha has 78 of the female representatives, Rajya Sabha has 24. But if you have to see the global average, it is at least 27%. So globally, 27% out of all the legislators are women. Even if you consider the very small countries like Rwanda and etc., they are at least been able to achieve 50% of the reservations, 50% of the representation of women into the legislature. So we, while being considering ourselves as a mother of democracy, why are we lagging through the 75 years? Forget about the British imperialistic policy, when not only women, entire India was secluded from the policy domain. Now it is 75 years is good enough period. We could have at least been reached to 30, 34, 35% level. That would have been even at least satisfactory. But in this Amrit Kal, if we are having a 14% representation of women, that is not a good thing to be happy about. So whatever the situation may be, the sad fact is the women are very, very underrepresented at this point of time. So it also indicates the need for these kinds of legislation. It further says there are currently 78 and 24 members respectively. Now in a research conducted by Inter-Parliamentary Women, India was ranked 149th. 149. The countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan are above India in terms of giving representation to the women in the legislatures. So should we not take the proactive steps? Should we not take the bold political moves to provide the representation of women to a larger extent in the legislature. And this act is for that. Moving ahead, it says another problem in this particular thing is that you see the success rate. You may think about that even if women are contesting, so how many will win? You see the data in front of you. In this 2014 election itself, around 668 women candidates contested. 668 women candidates contested. As opposed to how many were men? Around 7,500 were men candidates. And if you see their performance, women has by far outperformed the men's. Their success rate is 10%, while male success rate is only 6%. So if you give more opportunity, it's not the case that you are going to get disappointed. Women are performing well even on the mandate of the people. So why that divide of opportunities? Now now at this point of time, we may be very happy about, okay, this bill has been presented, so this bill will become act and everything will be good. This is just a first step I am talking about. This will not be all of it. There will require multiple approaches. Multiple approaches we will require. That we'll talk later bit. But let's see firstly that this kind of the bill which is presented, is it the first of its kind? Or had there been efforts in the past also? Then if there was efforts, then why it was not successfully implemented? So I'm repeatedly telling that this particular thing, women's reservation, has been a long pending dues. Long pending dues, and this was not only recognized by me. This is recognized by the various successive government over the years. Not only post-independent governments, but there were pre-independent demands in the pre-independent India also to provide these kinds of reservations. However, there were variations in these demands. In 1931, certain groups of women wrote to then Prime Minister of Britain, and they were quite against the women reservation, considering that this will be a defeat of the notion of the equitable society. However, I think that would be very, very narrow approach. If the reservation of women will be against the equitable society, then why reservation of caste will be in favor of equitable society? Is it only the caste which have received the discrimination, not the women had been disadvantaged? I am giving you a simple example that even if certain particular caste has been given the benefits of the reservation, who do you think among that particular caste will be more probable to reap the benefits out? Even if a scheduled caste or scheduled tribes given reservation into educational institution, and a particular scheduled caste family have 4 children, 2 out of them females, 2 out of them males, so who do you think is more probable to get admission, use the quota benefit? It is the males. So even if we had given the reservation on the basis of caste, women of respective castes has been left behind. So this is why it is pertinent. This is why it is a long pending dues. So I would say the first one being a very narrow approach. But sooner after that, since the making of the constitution was under the development, there were demands. So there was a famous freedom fighter called Renuka Rai, and she had quite proposed these kinds of reservation. She was of the opinion, if the men of this country has fought a freedom struggle and now they are coming to power, so they have got rewarded for whatever their efforts were. So it is also fair enough, so the women should also get their due share in this journey. But however, at that point of time, even after the debates in the Constitutional Assembly, we failed to incorporate a guaranteed reservation of women into the houses of legislature. Thereafter, there were various efforts. There were various committees. For example, there was a committee on the status of women in India, which was set up in 1971. This committee has recognized the fact of deteriorating declining political representation of women in India. But however, majority in this committee was still against providing a constitutional backing to the reservation of women seats into the parliament. But thereafter, a major achievement was when there was a national perspective plan for women in 1998. It had recommended, now you should note, in 1998, there was this plan which has recommended that there should be reservations in the legislature from grassroots level, that is Panchayati Raj institution, till the topmost level, that is parliament. However, Some of these recommendations were incorporated in the 73rd and 74th Amendment Act, wherein women are getting representations in the tune of at least 1/3 of the seats. Some states have gone ahead further, and most of the states around 20 in number. So they have applied 50% reservation to the women in Panchayati Raj institution. So this recommendation of National Perspective Plan on Women in 1988, some of these provisions were accepted, and in Panchayat 73rd and 74th Amendment Act, our Constitution of India was able to accommodate women reservations. But still, there was reservation of women in parliament and legislature that was still a distant reality. Thereafter, 10 or something years later, successive government has tried to introduce the 81st Constitutional Amendment Act under the leadership of a government led by H.D. Devegowda was introduced in 1996. The first sincere and first organized effort, I would rather say, to introduce the women reservation in the Constitution of India. However, the bill did not see the lights of the day, and it lapsed due to dissolution of the Lok Sabha. Government failed. Then thereafter, NDA-led government came, led by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and there were repeated efforts. Now you would be seeing on various news channel and YouTube, social media, that there is a word of taking credit. Ye bill kiska hai? I took it first. This is why I thought it is very important to trace through the entire history so that you have a holistic and unbiased opinion. There are successive government. It is not only about the present party in power or opposition party. There has been effort irrespective of the different parties. However, there has been a strong opposition from some of the minor parties, and sadly, due to that opposition, due to the future of coalitions were dependent upon those minor parties, these things could not see the light of the day, the reservation bills. Again, during 1998, the NDA government led by Shri Vajpayee introduced the bill. It got defeated. There, one of the MP of the RJD went to the well of the parliament, torn the bill. All these things happened. The high political drama happened. Thereafter, there was successive effort 1999, 2002, 2003 to again to introduce the same bill and get it passed by the parliament. All of them failed. We came very close to the passage of bill in 2010 when Rajya Sabha has passed the bill with a good majority, say 186 persons voting in the favor of the bill. This was by the UPA government led by Shri Manmohan Singh. So in 2010, they had introduced 108th Constitutional Amendment Act. 108th Constitutional Amendment Act was introduced by the UPA government in 2010, and that was passed to the Rajya Sabha, but it could not get the majority in the Lok Sabha due to again the opposition of certain political parties, and it lapsed due to the dissolution of the Lok Sabha then also. Now it is presented as 128th Constitutional Amendment Bill, and it is quite hopeful that this bill will get passed. Government is enjoying the majority in the Lok Sabha. It has almost the majority in the Rajya Sabha, and any which way it is supported by the major national opposition parties also. Quite probably the bill will be passed, and this will be a very revolutionary thing once the bill is enacted. However, there is still certain time that it sees the time of implementation. Let's see how the bill will change the provisions of the Constitution. 128th Amendment Bill. What does it tries to change, and where does it try to chip in the reservations for the women? Now it says it will have changes in the multiple articles of the Constitution, including 239AA. This relates to the government of NCT Delhi. Article 330, which already gives the reservation of members of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the parliament. Then you have Article 332, giving reservations to members of scheduled caste and scheduled tribe in the legislative assemblies of the state. And Article 334, which will talk about the tenure of these reservations. So this Constitutional Amendment Bill majorly seeks to change these articles. And what are the changes brought in? So it says, in the case of NCT Delhi, there will be 1/3 of the seats will be reserved for scheduled caste in the Legislative Assembly of the Delhi. Whatever the seat which are reserved for the scheduled caste in the Legislative Assembly of Delhi, so 1/3 out of that, 1/3 out of the seats which is already reserved for the scheduled caste in Delhi Assembly, 1/3 out of that shall be reserved for the women. And also those seats which are filled by direct election to the Legislative Assembly of Delhi, so 1/3 shall be reserved for the women themselves. Let's consider by an example. So suppose that in a Legislative Assembly there are 100 seats, and out of that 100 seats, 20 seats are reserved for scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So out of this 20, 1/3 shall be reserved for the members, women members of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. And if the remaining 80 seats are filled by direct election, so out of that 1/3 will also be reserved for the women. So there is a flat 1/3 reservation which is proposed by this bill in the NCT Delhi Legislative Assembly, legislative assemblies of the states, and union parliament in the House of People. So at all these three stages, or at all the three forums, 1/3 of the seats are reserved for the women in the respective categories. Moving ahead, let's see what are the other changes, other propositions in this particular act. So this act says, when does this reservation will be effective? This is the bigger question. So if you are thinking that tomorrow the bill will be passed and the reservation of women will be applied from the day after, it is not going to be the case. The Constitution Amendment Bill says this reservation shall come into effect after a delimitation has been conducted. So delimitation is an exercise of distributing whole India into territorial constituencies. So far we have 543 electoral constituencies for the House of People. This is done, this change, reduction or increase in the areas or increase in the number of the seats is done through an exercise which is called delimitation. Delimitation is to be conducted after every census which is to be taken after every 10 years, every decennial census, what we call is. But as of now, due to certain population disparity, the delimitation exercises has been frozen till 2026 in India. Now going by this, so reservation will come into effect after the delimitation has been conducted for this purpose, when the first census after the commencement of this constitution amendment has been taken. So suppose in 2023, this constitutional amendment is passed. So the day after the first census which is happening after 2023, first census which is happening after 2023. So after this census, the delimitation exercise will be conducted. And after that delimitation exercise will be conducted, 1/3 of the newly delimited seats will be reserved for the women. So firstly, the concept is this: first delimitation has been conducted after a fresh census which was taken after passing of this act, then only this will be given effect. Secondly, if that point of time any ongoing Lok Sabha is there, it will not be tampering with the seats of them. So possibly it is 2029 when this reservations will actually be fructified. Now once the reservation is commenced under this constitutional amendment bill, what is the tenure for which it is going to be there? 15 years for the commencement of this reservation. Once this reservation is applied, this will be for the 15 years. You may find that it's a kind of 𝐂𝐭 𝐲𝐬 𝐿. So we have talked too much, but only we are providing the reservation for 15 years. See, the very logic behind affirmative action is that these could not be a permanent tool. In a society, for the greater good of the society, the merit and the level playing field should be created, and affirmative actions are provided only for that. This could not be made a permanent feature of the constitution, because in long run it is going to compromise with the notion of equality. So even the caste-based reservation which is provided in the Constitution of India for House of People and Legislative Assembly, those were originally provided for 30 years from the commencement of Constitution. Ideally, it should have lapsed in 1980. But thereafter, successive amendment has given 10 years increment to those reservations. So it is quite possible that initially it is applied for 15 years, but thereafter it may be changed due to successive amendments to the Constitution. Right? But other provision says that these seats, once reserved for the women, they will also be changed, swapped on the rotations. So suppose that in the state of UP, there is 80 seats which are there, and out of this 80 seats, 1/3 seats are reserved for the women. Now, after the next delimitation it will be conducted, these 1/3 seats will be converted for unreserved, and next 1/3 seats will be reserved for the women. So there will be rotation of seats, and these rotation are to be done after every fresh delimitation is to be conducted. So going by the mandate of the constitution, delimitation has to be conducted after every census. So on a gap of 10 years, you will find. Once we started our constitutional journey, you will see 1952, there has been 3 decades, there has been 3 successive delimitation, until in 1976, the delimitation was paused till 2026. So these are certain changes which is sought to be introduced by the constitutional 128th amendment bill. But it's not that everyone is saying that this is a good bill. There are still certain proponents which says that this bill may not be as good. There are certain inherent defect into it. What are their arguments? Why certain people who are opposing this bill are arguing against it? Some say that this idea runs counter to equality. But see, our constitution talks about equality, but equality in a very qualified sense. Of course, the ultimate goal of the constitution is to create equality. But our idea is to apply equal protection of the law. And equal protection of law under Article 14 says equal treatment to the equally placed people. It's not that there should be a blanket absolute equality. Because if you go for applying the blanket or absolute equality, you are simply legalizing the all existing conventional and traditional injustices and exclusion which have been done into the society. So this is again, I would say, a very narrow approach that says that these kinds of reservations will run anti-equality. Going by that mandate, every reservation is running against the equality. So shall we stop every reservation? This is not actually feasible in the current socio-political landscape of India. Some other people say that women are unlike the caste group. So if you are classifying, for providing reservation, firstly you have to do reasonable classification of the citizens. So if you are classing a scheduled caste, all the members of scheduled caste are same. If you are classing scheduled tribes, all the members of the scheduled caste are homogeneous. But the proponents against this women reservation says, even in that scheduled caste, all women will not have the same status, because their status may change according to their husband or their family's status. This may be holding a ground up to certain extent. But just now we had discussed that even within a particular reserved category on the basis of caste, it is males who are more placed in advantageous situations. Women are there also discriminated and excluded. So don't you find it fair enough to give them reservations? Further, certain arguments also say that this will restrict the choices. Suppose that from a constituency A, if it is unreserved constituency, there X can contest, he may be male, Y can contest, he may be male, Z can contest, C can be female, W can contest, C can be female. So there are multiple choices, both on the basis, which is not restricted on the basis of gender. But if you reserve this seat, if you reserve this seat as women, so only women will be contesting, and this will restrict their choices. In order to tackle these situations, there are certain suggestions, there are certain recommendations which say that there should be the double member constituency. So if you are reserving this, there should be one member who will be contesting on the female category, and the one seats will be reserved open. Now this is what we call is the notion of the separate electorate. And separate electorate in India could not be introduced on whatever grounds, because during the Constitutional Assembly debates, or even before even before that, during our freedom struggle, we have fought a whole against this introduction of separate electorate. This will be a further division of Indian society. This is not practicable in the Indian context. This is again will lead to certain problems. There are pros of the women's reservation. There are certain arguments against also. But my point being, I have already told you that this is a very revolutionary step and will go down into the history as a very landmark event. And it is also indicated by the Prime Minister also that is going to be a very historic day, and he is born to do those kinds of historic things. But still there are certain caution road ahead. We may be very happy about the introduction of this bill, but we now need more sincereness in the implementation of this bill. Because I will simply try to analyze with this a factual data, that even in the 2019 elections, there were 209 women candidates who contested on independent tickets. But out of that, only one could get the winning ticket that could lead to the victory. Now, herein, we need to understand that even if more and more women are participating in the election, this will not guarantee their representation unless and until they are supported by political parties. We have seen there are various persons who are in the parliament and they are women, but very less of them are on the independent seats. This indicates towards the most important role of political parties. So not only the constitution should be amended, it is the political which will also be required to accommodate more and more women into their party lines, to give more offices of their parties to the women, to give more tickets to the women in their parties, and to choose those candidates who are not simply given ticket just they are women, but also they are very genuinely interested into active politics. So the role of party and intra-party democracy becomes all the most important in successful implementation of this constitutional amendment bill. So this is we have to see how we shape up our entire political system for this. That okay, for a matter of fact, we may introduce an amendment to the constitution and earn a lot of political credit and run a campaign in the next general elections. That is a different thing. But are the politicians themselves, is the political party themselves ready and willing to share these spaces with the women? There are political parties which are opposing. There may be an element of doubt because they do not have the next generations of political party leaders which are women. They are more centering upon the minor issues or certain specific issues. So this is a big thing that needs to be ensured, that unless and until this political will is there, this will again be a kind of the futile exercise. We have already seen that in Panchayat from 1993 onwards, 1/3 of the seats are reserved for the women. But you will realize that actually it's the women who are elected on the paper, but in practice, the works are actually dominated by the males in their family, their husbands, or the patriarchs in their family. One of the failure of this reservation system in the Panchayat is that women, however, been included constitutionally, but in practice, they have not found their stand so far. But of course, there has been certain advantage of the women reservation in the Panchayati Raj. Now, women are coming forward with more strong ideas. So these are certain things which needed to be taken care of before we can think about the success of this particular constitutional amendment. But having said all this, it is a kind of the historic thing that India is trying to go, and in all probability, this constitutional amendment will be passed, and this will go down as a kind of the landmark event in our constitutional history. For more updates on the issues like this, and even on this issue, once it will get passed and how the bill will be finally shaped, all these things, we stay tuned to the channel of the LevelUp IAS. Thank you for being there in this journey. Thank you so much.